Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Star Trek edition of the Secret Origins of Mint Condition. I am one of your hosts, James, and we have the whole J crew plus one today. So, of course, joining me on the bridge is Joe.
Hey, Trekkers, how you doing?
And John.
Hey, everyone.
And Josh.
The line must be drawn here.
I was waiting for who was going to do it first. And making their third appearance on the podcast, but their first Star Trek appearance, finally, Toby is back with us.
I was not protected by the temporal wake.
Well, none of us were.
We're was it five participants, all Borg.
Yeah.
So if you haven't looked at the episode title, audience, we are doing Star Trek First Contact. You know, we are keeping in the theme of, I guess, for this year's movies we're covering with time travel and the best movies in the franchise. We had recently covered Star Trek 4, and now we were into First Contact, also utilizing the theme of time travel. But, you know, to kind of go back to that conversation we talked about in the Star Trek 4 podcast, where the studio takes away the wrong ideas from successful movies. From Star Trek 4, they took away time travel and that the Earth has to be in peril. And from Wrath of Khan, they took away that it has to be an old villain that the crew faces. And somehow First Contact takes all the notes from the studio, and it's a fantastic movie. I mean, having rewatched it, I was like, this is probably my number 2 favorite Star Trek movie. I'll leave it up to everyone else. Toby, opening thoughts about Star Trek.
So I was really glad that we're doing this because I didn't plan to rewatch it because I've seen it, I don't know, 24 times, but I did rewatch it last night, and the beginning is so good. The score is amazing. The reveal of the new Enterprise is gorgeous as it comes out behind a nebula. Like, it's a beautiful shot. There's the scene in the ready room where it is, if you just look at the words they say, it's a insane exposition dump, but it doesn't feel like it. Like, the beginning is great, and then I don't know what happens to this poor movie. we had talked about like the Star Wars prequels, and I said my feelings toward them have gotten much more positive over the years. Like, same thing for Babylon 5, and I was realizing that my feelings about First Contact gotten much more negative over the years. It doesn't hold up to much thinking. I was having a lot of issues with stuff I had never even noticed before, and I will say I am prejudiced. I hate time travel as a trope. I hate it. It's basically like they wake up and it was all a dream, right? Time travel it's terrible for plots. It just negates consequences in a way that I really don't like. I feel bad for going first.
No, it's okay. We open for all opinions in this voyage.
And because lots of things in sci-fi are ridiculous, right? But you have to solve the travel, otherwise your story has to be just set between Earth and the moon, right? Or the ships have one person and the rest of the ship is just fuel, right? So you have to solve travel. You have to sort of hand wave some things that maybe don't make a lot of sense, but time travel is totally unnecessary. It's the least plausible thing technologically of everything that happens, and there's no need for it. So why? Why? And Star Trek 4 is fun, right? They get away with it so completely because it's a great time. And then First Contact is what if we went back in time, but it was to a war-torn shack in the woods? You're like, that's not fun. That's not the crew hanging out in San Francisco. That's a good time. So that's not so much this movie, but all time travel. And I sort of want justice for Lily. She is wronged so much in this movie. The treatment of that character is incredible in ways I never noticed before. Geordi knows the spot on the ground where First Contact happened, right? He's like, we meet them here? He's like, actually, over there. They've never heard of Lily. They've never heard of the co-pilot. No one calls her by name. They're like, we have to find Cochrane, and there's this woman needs medical attention. And she says at the beginning, like, I'm not going up there with a drunk pilot. So she was planning to go up there. They, of course, are protected by the temporal wake. So they remember the real first contact, which should have had Lily in it. They know every single thing about this event, not anyone else who worked on the ship or was in the ship. You're like, why? And then, so she is supposed to go on a historic space flight. Instead, she wakes up on a ship from hundreds of years in the future, meets a Klingon, has to sneak around through Borg, while Cochrane is really sad because people like him a lot. Lily's like, oh, Borg. She has to face actual Borg. The person she's trusting with her life takes her to a 1920s casino. She is having the worst day anyone's ever had. And at the end, 2 other people take the historic flight. All she got to do was run from Borg. It's like, what? But it does have so many good moments if you just sort of are like, all right, I won't think about what you're doing to the Borg here. How you're adding in a weird individual person. That's the scenes with the Queen and Data are so different almost 30 years later. And that's why I say, like, if I am sort of a little bit more distracted and I'm just like, yeah, go get them, go shoot those Borg, then it's a great movie. The score continues to be gorgeous through the whole. I love Evacuation. The way they score the launching of the escape pods is gorgeous. It's like right up there with Evacuating Hoth. It's like just some of the greatest evacuations ever filmed. But it is, I would say, it is sort of like the first, and maybe people will have a different view of this. I'd be really interested to hear. But like, it begins our sort of action hero Picard, where he goes down the driving dune buggies path that we get to later, and then the like in Picard the series, he makes fun of the Doctor for liking math. Right? She's like, math can be, or calculus can be soothing. He's like, I'll take your word. But like in the second season, he solves math problems for fun. Like that's what he's doing. So it's like he starts out in the second season doing math problems for fun as a hobby. And then by Picard, the series, he's making fun of the nerds for liking math so much. And like, I feel like this is, in retrospect, I wouldn't have known this really until thinking about Picard the series more, but it's like this feels like the very beginning of Picard the action hero instead of Picard the very intelligent space professional. I don't know. I've talked too much. I'm gonna stop. I want to hear everybody else's.
No, like I said, we have all different. We're all gonna have different opinions. Like I said, I personally love the movie, but I will say that as the movies went on, and I don't know if it started with First Contact, Patrick Stewart had like I guess sign off on the script and sign off on the crew, to the point of like perhaps the detriment of Insurrection and Nemesis, but.
Because like the Dune buggy was like a personal request, wasn't it?
Yeah, this is. I mean, we can. I don't want to get off topic into other movies that we may or may not get into later in our timeline this podcast. But yes, I do know Patrick Stewart was heavily involved in the movie process going on. But anyway, I guess we'll just move over to the panel a little bit, and then we can dive into more specifics. Josh, your thoughts?
Oh, well, no, I actually just wanted to say, well, one of the interesting results of that for this movie was Ron Moore and Brandon Braga had finished a draft of the script that they were pretty happy with. They sent it to Patrick Stewart because, again, he contractually had to sign off on it. And, they were all excited about it for him to read it. And he read it over a weekend, and then they had a phone call, and he was very, very disappointed. And they were like, I don't understand. And then he had a suggestion. Well, he had an observation that they realized was exactly right and was an easy fix. In the draft that he read, Riker stayed on the Enterprise to fight off the Borg. Picard was on the planet making the first warp flight with Zefram Cochrane. And Patrick Stewart was saying, no, Picard should be on his ship and he should be shooting the Borg and he should be, fighting them. And Riker should be the one on the planet sort of managing the repair of the Phoenix and interacting with Zefram Cochrane. And so they just switched it, and then all of a sudden you open up the whole, okay, so Picard is fighting Borg again, and now they have taken over his ship, and now that's really churning up a lot of stuff for him. So as soon as they made that change, they realized that they were insane for not having it that way at the beginning, which I thought was really interesting. But yeah, in general, Toby, by the way, I really appreciate your perspective on this because I very rarely hear anyone say too many negative things about this movie. So, everything you say is right. And yes, in retrospect, the deriving the wrong lessons from successful movies, perhaps, and also, the increased level of input that Patrick Stewart has. Yes, you could point to this as the moment where they turn Picard into an action hero, which I think is part of why most everything after this doesn't really work, because it's an awkward fit. It's not the character, it's not the franchise, it's not this show or this movie series, and they've been continually trying to fit Star Trek into like a tentpole sci-fi action adventure mold, and I don't even think it's particularly well suited to being a feature film franchise to begin with. I think it's more of an episodic, talkier, more cerebral ongoing series. But anyway, that said, I do think that this movie works really, really well. I think it's probably, for my money, out of the 4 next gen movies, I think it's probably best one of the 4. If for no other reason than I think out of all of them, it's just the most cohesive. It's the one where the stakes are clear and very well defined. The objective is clear. The why things are happening is clear. The characters' motivations are clear and compelling. There's no confusion. Visually, I think it's very striking and very cohesive in a way that none of the other movies really are. I think my second favorite is probably Generations. But that's, that movie is a little mushy as well in terms of, motivations and justifying why things are happening. And I really love it, but it's not as just solid a movie as First Contact is. I think First Contact, among the next generation movies, is really the only one that really feels like a movie. And it's interesting too, because I even remember at the time that there was kind of a sense of, okay, they're just kind of going crazy with it. There were 2 things that were sort of, sorry, I had a word in my notes that this movie combines 2 Star Trek guilty pleasures that, when overused, are sort of give diminishing returns, which are the Borg and time travel. But it really works, I think. And I think a part of why it works is because for a movie, those 2 concepts are very clear. The Borg are a very straightforward, well-defined foe, and they're visually very striking. Their motivation is very straightforward. The time travel, it's like, okay, we get it. They're destroying the past, so we have to reset the past. Yeah, I just think it's a really cohesive movie, and I think it works really well. And it's surprising that it works as well as it does, because not to knock Jonathan Frakes, but before this, he'd only directed episodic TV. So the idea that he would be handed a feature film and create something as compelling and dynamic and engaging as this, obviously they must have had some inkling that he had it in him, because otherwise I don't think he would have gotten the job. But yeah, I think this is I think it's a good movie. I would probably rate it not my second favorite, but it's definitely up there for me.
Yeah, I think Jonathan Frakes, like he said, I can't remember the story, but he got it last minute because he got a month less than the normal director would have to prep the movie, and he somehow got this all done while also starring in it. So yeah, it's much, it's a huge accomplishment, I think, for Jonathan Frakes, considering he had a short timetable and he was directing and acting at the same time. So John, what are your thoughts? First Contact.
I have lots of thoughts, but we'll try to limit them down. First of all, I love Toby coming in right out. They get guns blazing.
I'm sorry. I was all panicked from being late.
So I First of all, I'm going to take us back in time. I'm going to, go back in time to viewing it. I believe, Josh, I don't remember if you were there. I know that James, Toby, and myself were there because I remember Toby's mom driving us.
No, it was James's dad.
Was it James' dad?
Yeah.
Was that wasn't another movie?
No.
The second time we saw it, because we did see it twice.
It might have been. It might have been that we saw it other times.
And that was one of the only times we all ever like got out to the movies together and could agree on seeing the same movie together. That was always a point of contention in the Mint Condition era. None of us wanted to see the same movies.
And it was great on the big screen.
It was fantastic on the big screen.
The scene where they pan up when they're walking on the hull and like they show Worf being, dizzy. Exactly the way I would. Like, I got actually dizzy in the theater in that shot. Like, it was great.
It was amazing, and I remember that too. Like that was the thing. Like, you were actually like, I think you made a comment about like needing Dramamine, and we these teenagers, we loved it, laughing at all the laugh points, making comments. I remember your comments about Patrick Stewart's biceps and how he seems to be reverse aging, because there he was getting all buff and all actiony, and I feel like that does play into the story of Patrick Stewart and where he goes. I did not know how much he was involved in the sign off for the movies, and now I have an opinion about that, because if he signed off on Nemesis, and what a ball of crap that was, I want to say like, hey, you can't blame the studio entirely. You had sign off on it. But listening to his autobiography is a really interesting experience, because I say that because I listened to the audiobook, and that he really did feel at the end that was the end of Picard's story, and there was always a sense of it being, well, it wasn't that great of an ending, and it just, what are we going to do after that? We don't want to do anymore. And I wonder, how that goes into expectations of moving it from a TV series to cinema, cinematic and theatrical levels. It's really hard to do. I think the original cast had a lot of ups and downs with that. We've obviously had our episode here about the motion picture, how that wasn't a complete 180 in terms of style to Wrath of Khan, sort of another dramatic style change with Star Trek 4. It goes back and forth, and this was sort of a bit of a, I don't want to compare it to anything else, because it's not like it's trying to be Wrath of Khan or anything like that. It was what it was, but trying to make that jump is really, really difficult. And all I remember is really enjoying the movie, thinking it's better than Generations, which now I have a mixed opinion on, because that's a movie where I really was so unsettled by the death of Captain Kirk as a teenager, as a kid. It was like, oh my God, that overpowered so much of it. The same way that this movie, was such a fun action romp, that's mostly what I took away from it. At first glance, when I was thinking about doing, what we were talking about this episode, I said, well, what was the movie's big thematic philosophical point? And my gut reaction was, oh, there is none. So, oh no, there is some, but it takes a lot of second stage to the action, and to the intensity of the characters and the humor, which I'll get back to the humor in a minute. But the movie did have something that I'm only really recognizing after having talked about other sci-fi series, where Star Trek is now, talking about modern context of things. The movie story goes right into this difficult concept in the Star Trek universe, that the 21st century is dark, bleak, full of death, full of loss. Like, they're coming into a world that has been completely shattered and broken. Not thrown back to the Stone Age, obviously. You have Zephyr Cochrane developing new technologies, but the world infrastructure itself completely destroyed. You don't even know who. I think I remember. It was like the Eastern Front, something like that. The different forces they're referring to with fictional names, but like they were still expecting attacks. This is post-apocalyptic, post-World War III. We got hints of that in the Next Gen Encounter Farpoint, with the trials. There are references in Deep Space Nine, which I got to think, in my timeline is correct. I think around the same time the movie is released, within a year, is when the episode taking place in 2024 and the Bell riots are happening, where Cisco goes back in time. That's the beginning of the end for our 21st century civilization as we knew it before, World War III breaks out. This was right there. This was right there in the dark. The Borg brought us back to that moment, because this was, in that darkness, people did manage to pull off an amazing accomplishment. And you get there, and it's nothing of what you expect. Zephyr Cochrane isn't what you expect. Geordi is disappointed by his hero in so many ways. It really is actually, it functions on a few more levels in spite of itself. And I have a feeling that some of it was actually taken away by the time they got to filming from the script. That was just a sense I got as watching it. They do it pretty well. That it's going to get bad. But how do you deal with that in Star Trek? Because we're there watching it at the end of the 20th century. And we're like, oh boy, a couple decades from now, it all goes away. We bomb ourselves back in time. And then we have to wait on one drunk, sarcastic guy who's sort of trying to develop his new warp theory thing that he happens to be able to sort of pull off on his own with help of, again, they really, really not featured well enough.
With the help of that woman, I think is how they refer to her.
She becomes that woman in so many ways because, yes, she gets her own time in the spotlight, but I never thought about it from your perspective, that she did not get the same credit, both from history, but also, Alfre Woodard is amazing, first of all. You just have to say, amazing actor on every single level. And Lily's an interesting character, but she is really key to Cochrane being able to get anything done. Maybe he had the warp theory in mind. It seems like she did all the real work and then had to wake his drunk ass up to get him to actually fly the damn thing, in the original timeline. Obviously, people take that role. But it's wild to think how that changes. But she was the one, her character through Lily was the one that was most representative of that time. She had that sense of, she was working with him. She was trying to get something done, but she knew what the world was at that point. She wasn't overly hopeful. She was suspicious, and she was just very pragmatic. And that's what people were in that world. It's the opposite of what you experience from the Enterprise crew. So I love that dichotomy. I love that we got to see that part and see the crew have to face that this was humanity's experience going into that. And when you do get to the end, when the Vulcans detect the ship and come down, and how wildly different, you imagine First Contact to be from, the mentions it gets in future Star Trek. They come down and they see, for lack of a better term, a very primitive, barbaric culture, and Zephyr Cochrane is, sort of, getting drunk and greeting him again. It's not what you expected. I love that subversion of expectations. I thought it really added so much to the mythology that we had never really gotten into before, and it's shaped mythology ever since, from all the shows that followed to the shows that were on at that time. I mean, you have Deep Space Nine, you have Voyager on, you have Enterprise, which ties into that. Literally, they bring back James Cromwell to reprise Zephyr Cochrane very briefly, and you see how that's evolved over time. But that also sets up Enterprise for how the Vulcans were deliberately holding humanity back because they were like, hey, you ain't ready. And for all the annoyance of the Vulcans and their overly self-confident logic, they weren't entirely wrong. I mean, we had been a complete mess in the 21st century, and we're really obviously horrific to each other as human beings. So this movie touches on that, though it doesn't get into the interhuman drama of that century or exactly why it happened. But looking back, I really appreciate that. To me, the Borg storyline becomes the second story, even though it's the most action-focused one. It's the one that people will think about the most in terms of the enjoyment component. To me, that's not the important part of the movie. They're another piece getting you back in time to say, look what happened, look how important it was, look how close we were to not getting there, and how precarious all of it is. That entire utopian society of the future is so precarious. If all the events hadn't lined up coming out of that utter Mad Max scenario. I like the movie on a few levels. The action works. I have such a problem now and I don't like this with an adult, with the humor. As a Trekkie back then, when it was still relatively new, Star Trek 6 comes out with Spock using the line, was Star Trek 6? He says, go to hell. I would tell them to go to, it's like, leave out, tell them, go to hell. And that was a moment. Leonard Nimoy, just that was great. Now they're trying to well, let's just do that with Data again. I was like, okay, all right, let's do it again. And they did. And you know what? It was acceptable for this movie. It wasn't as good as in Star Trek 6, but it was entertaining. It was fun. It was a crowd pleaser. We all laughed. The entire audience lost their collective minds. It was good. It worked. Then they keep on doing it every single damn other movie with Data. It was the same Data storyline started in Generations when he gets his emotion chip, doing it again in this movie, and then they just beat that comedic horse to death. And that was my other problem. What the hell is a Borg Queen doing anywhere? It's a collective The Borg Queen is the first time, and it became part of canon, big part of the Voyager storyline. That's not at all the Borg. I guess, got the Hugh stuff going on, individuality was inserted into it. I mean, there's some explanations you can give into it, but it did profoundly change the nature of the Borg. And again, I'm going to make my same complaint, and feel free to edit this anywhere you want into any other podcast or any other part of this one. Why is the Enterprise always getting its ass kicked? Like, just let it be what it was in the beginning of the movie, which I was so happy to see. That the Enterprise comes in, glorious, beautiful, sleek, new, gigantic ship in the Sovereign class, and it pops out of warp and starts taking the hits from the Borg cube to shield the rest of the fleet. And it doesn't even shudder. It's just like, yup, bring it on, bring it on. They're not even warp, shields going down. They're just sitting there pumping their quantum torpedoes into the Borg cube and winning the battle. That's what I wanted to see. And it's like, nope, we can't have that for too long because that's bad drama or something. We're going to now have it be completely taken over. Now we have to jettison half the crew and do this and do that. And I'm like, oh, all right, well, there we go. Enterprise can't be cool again. But at least they got to have it in the end, unlike, Nemesis. That's my takeaway from this film is the Enterprise gets to flex its muscle for once, gets to look really good, gets to be really cool for a while, and I appreciate that. So I'll leave it there.
And I'll say that, and the Defiant finally got to do what it was designed to do, which was fight the Borg. So we got to see for that one scene, which it never got to do in DS9, was fight the Borg. So
that's quite a tough little ship.
The one sort of phrase that kept coming up in my head as I watched it, it was sort of a similar thought to The Final Frontier, where I just wanted to say, we like these characters, right? That's why we're here watching the 8th movie. We don't want to see them be stupid, right? We don't want Scotty walking into a bulkhead, right? What? We don't want that. Brilliant. He knows his way. Just because he doesn't like the Excelsior, he bonks his head. What? No, we love them. We want to see them be great. And there were some times in this movie where, with the characters, there was the same as the ships. It's we like the Enterprise, right? We would like it not to blow up every single movie. We like it. We like the Defiant. It's cool.
I love how it can last an entire 7 years in deep space, countless missions with every movie. Nope.
I hadn't even thought of it about the ships, John, and you're so right.
Well, let me now, Joe, you've been patiently waiting.
Yeah, I'll be brief.
No, you have to be brief. You can take your time. You have your time.
I don't want to.
We are here to expound.
Picard is an action hero, here, and I don't know if that him becoming an action hero in this movie, makes the next two movies as poor as they are. Said by Chris, it sets a trend. But Picard's great action moment here was when he decides to let go of the white whale. This is Moby Dick, and Picard drops his propriety and his self-control to go after his white whale. And that's where I saw this. And he needs Lily to bring him back to his sanity. And she does. And he finally goes out there, leaves his ready room and goes out on the bridge and says, yeah, we're going to abandon the ship. And he apologizes to Mr. Worf. To me, that was the highlight of the film, that sequence.
Yeah.
And I just think that, we in Star Trek Generations, we saw Picard dealing with his mortality, personally, he lost his brother and his nephew. And he'd said to Counselor Troy, I realize now there's less days ahead than there were behind. And I understand it. I get it. And I think that's the crux of this film. And I think that's why this is such a damn good Star Trek movie. It's my second favorite after The Voyage Home. I love this film.
I love that they're still dealing with Picard's trauma.
Yeah.
Because that is not a thing that Star Trek does typically. Right? It's he lived out 30 years of a different life. And then it's like, oh, well, there's a meeting at 3. And you're like, same thing with O'Brien. He does his life sentence in the brain prison. And it's like, yeah, these turbo lifts, Chief. And you're like, well, you just put a thing in my head where I was imprisoned for my entire life and was so hungry I murdered my only companion. Like, yeah, but the turbo lifts, no, just back to work. And so I do love that we get at least one thing where they acknowledge the horrors that these crew have gone through over the years. Like, I don't know, like people joke about Troy, but like she's incredible, right? I think I said this last time. She's a genius counselor. That crew should all just be in the fetal position on the floor. Like, they have been possessed by aliens like 12 times. Like, they've gone through horrific things. And they're all doing really well. So I am glad that we get with the episode where he goes, back to the vineyard, and then with this movie, it's like, I like that we can acknowledge how traumatizing some of these things are that they've gone through.
Because it's not something they don't really like. We get family, which again, arguably one of the greatest Next Gen episodes, which is
my favorite Next Gen episode.
Yeah, it's like a pause for the crew after all these horrific things, especially Picard. Yeah. And then obviously, because of the way things are written back then, we don't really get any. It doesn't come up again, his trauma with the Borg, until this movie. Obviously, it's the main focus of season 3 of Picard, the series. But it's
in so many ways, that's what gave us those parts of the Picard series. And Joe, thanks for that was needed, because that brought out what the point of the movie was. It's Moby Dick. It was becoming obsessed with your white whale or whatever it is, and that storyline is really so well communicated. That's if that's the purpose of Lily, the character, I totally respect that. It could have been any person they encountered. I feel like she did get a raw deal in terms of her position in history, and again, who she's perceived as. And I think that's a problem with the writing and a problem with other things. But her strength and her strength of self matched and exceeded Captain Picard, in this movie. And that.
And to further that, John, she survived a world war along with her compatriots down, in the devastated Earth. And she didn't give in to despair.
Yeah.
And she created this, helped Cochrane. She actually built the ship. So she can't understand why this man of the future, and he keeps saying we're Mueller filed a couple of times, she can't understand why he's acting this way. So she's got to basically grab him by the collar and, wake this guy up. Come on. Your life isn't your life's not as bad as mine. Look what I lived through. You can live through that.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point there, because she wasn't saying, I went through this, so therefore you have to sink down to a lower level. She's saying, I came out of that.
Yeah.
And have gotten to this. Where are your evolved sensibilities that you're telling me all about now?
Exactly.
When he's going, that's why she is this incredible. Again, she should be one of those historical figures that is, a part of Starfleet Academy training, as much as Zefram Cochrane or anybody else.
She should be the first counselor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, no, I was just going to say, we're talking about this as if the Lily character was done a disservice, but let's be real for a second. I mean, that's very realistic that, she's the one who's doing all of the, the heavy lifting and the emotional labor and physical labor and intellectual labor to make this, man look like he's a hero. Right,
two men. She gets to talk down two angry old men in this first Cochrane and Picard.
They're remembered as great men of history, and there's nary a mention of Lily Sloan anywhere in Starfleet Academy. So I mean, while
there might be, she might be.
No, I mean, yeah, sure.
But
well, except that the crew of the Enterprise encounters her, no one was like, "Hey,
it's Lily.
You're Lily Sloan."
Yeah, they should have been so excited. Picard is touching the ship.
Yeah, right.
Lily?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. There's this random person here.
Well, so this sort of ties into a thought that I had a few years ago, and I think would be really interesting. This never could have happened for so many reasons, but what if First Contact was here? Let me put it this way. Let's imagine Captain Sisko in the Lily Sloan role. So Captain Sisko is commanding the Defiant with Worf. Same thing happens, except Worf and Sisko are rescued by the Enterprise. And then Sisko sees Picard for the first time since that first scene between them and Emissary in Deep Space Nine, where Picard realizes, oh, he still sees Locutus and he blames me for murdering his wife and his crewmates. So maybe the crew of the Enterprise has forgiven me, but this man still has a lot of unresolved trauma, same as I do. So they are then seeing each other for the first time since that moment in the middle of fighting that same enemy again. And then Sisko is the one who has to help Picard overcome his trauma. And it's really interesting too, because if you start to think about that scene between Lily and Picard in the observation lounge, the famous scene where like she basically knocks some sense into him, and he realizes like, oh, I'm Ahab. So imagine if that was Sisko who was making Picard realize he had to let go of the past and of this like revenge fantasy. I don't think that the franchise at that time liked cross-contaminating their silos, but it could have made for a really cool Deep Space Nine Next Gen team-up movie event.
Great.
And I want to interject, like,
Yeah.
for all of our complaints here, now let's go to the next level. Other people had the same thoughts, and they addressed it in Lower Decks, in the finale of the show. You have now Captain Lily Sloan from an alternate universe. So that's so interesting that like I'm putting it together now. I'm like, wait a second, that episode, that writing, and Alfred Woodard coming back to reprise that role, I think is in large response to the reactions we're having here, because she comes back as the captain of the Beagle, a ship that so instead of Zephyr Cochrane developing the warp drive, what was it, a quantum reality drive, I believe. So they're like jumping, through realities. And the storyline of the final season of Lower Decks is that, there's this mysterious force out there that is tearing through realities and causing all kinds of problems. And when they zero in on it, it's an explorer ship. It's the Beagle that has learned how to travel through different realities, but it's having unintended consequences. Now, Captain Sloan there loves travel. The person pursuing her is, at that point, Captain Boimler on the Defiant. And he's just exhausted from this, hates travel, just wants to stay at home all the time now. And she loves exploring. And the interesting thing is so they encounter the Beagle, and the Beagle is the cause of these problems while they're exploring new realities. And the very first thing after trying to defend her ship that Captain Sloan does is offer unqualified help to Captain Boimler. Like, oh, we absolutely have to fix the multiverse. We will do that. But she goes on to talk about the nature of exploration, seeing constant variations instead of going just from worlds out in distance, the different variations of people and everything else. It was brilliant, and maybe the send-off that really the character and the actor deserve to get from that. And I'm really grateful that they did that for this character, because she shows, again, strength, but she's a little bit in the opposite role of like, well, she has to be approached to be like, hey, what you're doing is actually causing the problem. But it's literally what she should have done as a response, as opposed to what happened with Picard. It was, oh, okay, then what do we do next to make this right? And I think that's the perfect bookend for her character. And the example of that's how you can also live a life. And she did have a uniform, if you notice, it was the Enterprise era uniform. That's so cool that like the very things we're noticing in this movie, writers later on addressed. And that's why I think Lower Decks might be amongst the best Trek ever made, because it does things like this. Besides being just fun, really smart television, it is thoughtfully written for the fans to both have fun with the past or really addressing the things that all the fans have thought about over the years, jokingly and seriously and dramatically and problematically. So she does get a good, I think, a really good bookend in that regard. And I'm just grateful for that.
Yeah, and I don't want to turn this into like a backdoor Lower Decks episode, because Lord knows we could, but I think they brought her up a few times actually in Lower Decks, because I think she was also mentioned in that episode where they had to go to Zephyr Cochrane Park, the site of First Contact, and it was a theme park. I think she was brought up there too, and she might have been talked about in Discovery also. So I think people who have written things about Star Trek after the fact of this movie have tried to fit Lily into the canon. And make her recognized. But arguably also, like, to your point, Joe, of like she's the one who snaps him back, and John, we were just saying she's arguably the hero of the movie, because Picard would have gone down and possibly lost, and the Earth would have gotten I mean, he might have destroyed the ship, but obviously the Borg were able to stop the self-destruct, and he would have gone down or lost, and the, the whole mission would have been kaput.
He would have gone down, not in history, I guess, with the time travel. Not how sure that one works.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, and I mean that's what makes it frustrating that no one knows who she is, even though they should have the preserved memory of her flight. Like if she was a bad character, you'd be like, yeah, that's why they don't know her. But like she just continues to be amazing. And so each amazing thing she does just makes you more like, well, why isn't it the Cochrane and Lily part? Like,
what do you think wrote the first account of First Contact? Was it by the Vulcans? If so, we can blame them for getting Lily.
That's true. You can go back to blaming the Vulcans.
Question for you guys. What do you think Gene Roddenberry would have made of this movie? Because in a lot of ways, I do think this movie, was arguably the height of popularity in like the quote unquote culture that Star Trek ever had, I think. And it was also sort of a turning point in terms of, and maybe I have a bias because it parallels my own personal fandom at the time. But for me, this was a turning point where after this, I started to not like a lot of the Star Trek output more and more. But it's also a turning point in terms of this is the first movie that it kind of feels like it's making a pretty dramatic break, almost as dramatic as the entirety of Deep Space Nine, with Gene Roddenberry's vision as he articulated it of what he wanted the show to be and what he thought the future of the 24th century would be like. I'm wondering what you guys think he would think of the movie.
I think he would have hated the movie. I think he absolutely would have hated the movie. He already in his life he expressed a discontent with Star Trek VI. I think there were a number of reasons. I suspect it was a lot of personal difficulty about not being able to be fully involved in it as his health declined. But because I think that Star Trek VI actually shows amongst the best of humanity, even though the Federation is not perfect in that. It's also not perfect in the original Trek. It's imperfect in its follows, but that's a whole separate thing. This movie shows an absolute. I think it shows the real three-dimensionality to these characters. But from the Roddenberry perspective, I think that Picard goes way too far, and that whole idea of like him losing those advanced sensibilities to that level isn't something he would have wanted his captain to do. And the irony being that he didn't want Patrick Stewart or Captain Picard. Right. He thought he was too intellectual, too almost, which is ironic because Picard almost embodies in the original series so much of the ideals that Roddenberry was striving for. But Roddenberry also wanted that sort of 1950s style cowboy Hollywood archetype to be there as well, which those are in a bit of conflict. So Picard is that. And then to see him go, sort of the other direction as he deals with his own trauma. And that's something that I think to a modern viewer is really relatable and understandable, that no matter how far we go, when something hard hits us, we have to face it and work our way through it. That's something that Roddenberry never really told in his stories as much. It wasn't that you, it was more so that like, oh, but your inborn character now of your evolved nature simply is able to repel the bad thing. That's not how it's ever likely to be, no matter how evolved we get. So Roddenberry wouldn't have liked it. I don't think he's right necessarily in his disliking of it, but I will say his critiques were always, I think, on the nose. If you're trying to just draw up drama for the sake of drama, that's what he was really ardently against. Was he didn't want it to become a literal soap opera of just like, well, somebody separated so-and-so, another person on the crew, and now they hate each other, and now that person slapped that person, and now they're fighting. Like, that wasn't what he wanted on the everyday level. Characters would go through profound, moments of difficulty and things, but I feel like modern Trek sometimes walks up to that edge of where they're just sort of poking at some drama, and I feel like you get a little close to that in the later Star Trek films. This one sort of dances up to that line too. But I think that I would be able to stand up to Roddenberry's criticism, at least of Picard, in the wake of what he went through with the Borg, in the wake of having to reassert the values, the things, because that's the whole point about whether you're fighting for freedom or fighting for evolved ideals. It's a constant process. I think that the Roddenberry vision is sort of like, well, we get there and it's great, and we just continue exploring, and and what beat the foes. It's not that easy. You do need these moments where you come up against your own shadow and you have to defeat it again and again and again. But should the show be entirely about that? No. And that's where I think the problem is with some aspects of where, Jack could get lost in that. But no, he wouldn't have liked it. But I don't think he would have liked a lot of modern Trek. I don't think he would have liked Deep Space Nine at all.
Well, because he said it shouldn't be about like war is the main thing, right? And
Yeah.
That's the reason I've heard most often for why people think Roddenberry would not have liked Deep Space Nine, was that it's entirely about war for the second half. And who knows, right? Because he didn't see that part, right?
He didn't see any of it. I mean,
so it's all speculation. Who knows? And I love Deep Space Nine so much, but I also absolutely understand that criticism, right? Of like, maybe we don't want war but it can be both. DS9 is complicated.
No, when I started thinking a lot about this movie in preparation for this conversation, I couldn't shake the thought that First Contact has a lot of the DNA of Deep Space Nine in it, from the like superficial of the color palette, the lighting is a little moodier, things are a little grittier, all the way down to this movie is exploring long-term consequences of the old stories in a way that that's what a lot of Deep Space Nine was about following through on the consequences of events, and showing the characters change and deal with things, and how situations evolve. And also, in a sense, it also does the same trick of, on Deep Space Nine, the way that they got around Roddenberry rule of no interpersonal conflict among the crew was to make half the characters not from Starfleet. And this movie does something similar, where with Zefram Cochrane and with Lily Sloan, they have the crew of the Enterprise have to contend with these flawed characters who are not cut from the same cloth as them. And you can get away with a little more because that the conflict there can bring out some interesting reactions simply because of the lack of understanding between them. Like, well, why are you behaving like this? I don't understand. Like, blah, blah, blah. I agree with you, John. I think the choice to make Zefram Cochrane completely a 180 from what the crew, what they imagined him to be, and what we as the audience imagined him to be. I mean, actually, who we saw him to be in the original series is like, we had this very specific conception of that kind of great man of history, a genius inventor who transformed the world. So to reveal him to be like a kind of lecherous, like
I love that word.
Yeah, no, me too. It's a good word. It's the other thing too. My question about what you think Roddenberry would think of this movie. I agree with what everyone has said, but the other thing too was that Gene Roddenberry also liked money.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
And I think you can read the crew's encounter with Zefram Cochrane in this movie. I don't think it's reading too much into it to read it as what, like Ron Moore and Brandon Braga, how they saw Gene Roddenberry. When you meet the creator of Star Trek and you realize he's a womanizer and he likes money and drugs and is like
lecherous.
Yes. I think they've spoken about this, with this idea that like you have to reconcile the man who created this thing that you love, that has at its core all of these values and ideals. The man himself is incredibly flawed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes, it brings to mind the old adage, don't meet your heroes.
Right. Yeah, that's the really important thing about even Roddenberry is if you get caught up too much, again, in the myth of the man, you're going to lose what the man was saying rather than anything else. And he was massively flawed, but he had these great ideas. He got some of them made manifest into art, and film. So,
sorry, John, but you,
Yeah, no,
you just said massively flawed.
it's so easy to get caught up in the loop of that, and then and as with other franchises. So in this case, answering the question as to whether he would have liked the film is itself, it becomes less relevant over time because he started this, but what it's going to become has to be taken over by others who will take it further than he could based on the mind he had in the 1960s. He was a product of his time, so there'll always be new people. Some people won't do it in a way that anybody likes. Others will say it's great. But, I appreciate him for who he was. And I don't expect any more than who he was. But that doesn't mean that I'm limited just to who he was in terms of where I think Star Trek can go.
And the characters he created, especially for the original series, they were flawed. Kirk was flawed. McCoy
Yeah.
was definitely flawed. And Spock was flawed, but not in the, in a traditional sense, because he was just battling himself. He was battling his own demons. But so I think, he's a very complex man, Mr. Roddenberry. And you look at his history, oh boy, this guy, what do people think of him if he was doing this today? I never see Star Trek as this utopian, because it's not. It's really not. It's what movie was it that coined the, was it the first movie, Josh? The Human Adventure Continues?
Yeah,
Right?
the first movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you're talking about humanity, well then, obviously we're talking about flaws, because that's the whole history of humanity. That's who we are, for good or bad. So I think Star Trek tries to bring out the best, but for dramatic sake, you've got to have conflict. Otherwise, you're not going to have a show. Nobody's going to watch. Yeah, to me, Star Trek is about. We've talked about this before. You had said it on the previous episode, Josh. It's about you referenced me that said it was about family, and I said yes. I'm not the first one to say that, but it is about family. And God, do we know about our families, right? Do we always get along with our families? Of course not. Putting the Barones in space. Imagine them on the Enterprise.
That's another reason they need a counselor.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's also why I think Deep Space Nine and certain aspects of this movie actually work really well in ways that maybe Gene Roddenberry wouldn't have agreed with or wouldn't have appreciated. But I think that they're actually engaging with his ideas, with his conception of what humanity will become in the 24th century, by really, holding it up to the light and taking it seriously and being like, okay, how did we get there? And how, what made it possible? So, like, the thing about Deep Space Nine that I love is that Cisco has that line about how it's easy to be a saint in paradise, right?
Yeah.
And what Deep Space Nine really is a stress test of Roddenberry's utopia. So what happens when you take away, physical safety, and what happens when you take away certainty, like knowing who you can trust, like with the shapeshifters and stuff, and anyone can be a changeling, and now you suspect everybody. What happens when you take away technological superiority and moral superiority, and like, what are you left? So are 24th century humans so perfect just because it's convenient and they live in a world that makes it easy to be that way?
That's so true, and that's what this movie really captures, that notion of like, well, what happens when you do face that, and how do we come back and continue to evolve? I think from a storyline perspective, what the movie does, it has its humor, it has its drama, has the great character moments as well. I think, like anything else, I don't think movies are ideal for Star Trek. We've gone over a lot of them. I don't think movies really are the ideal format for Star Trek. I think series, but that said, it's only modern series that really have continuity to them, where the characters, what happened previously, we get to explore what that happened. And exploring isn't just about nebulae and star systems. It's about what's happening inside us. And Q goes into that. And getting that from modern Trek, I feel like in many ways the movies do keep a little bit of continuity there, as we see into even going into Nemesis and Insurrection. And what happens in this movie sets that tone that the characters will be challenged. What they are will be challenged, and it's not just about finding a creative way around the problematic alien of that episode. It's about how do they face the darkest aspects of their own nature and come out of it, and then get to the next part of humanity and go on to that. And I think you do get a sense of that from this. And I think that modern Trek takes a lot of cues from that in you certainly see that in Picard, which makes sense because that would be sort of a direct throwback to this, especially based on Terry Natalis and the time that he grew up watching Star Trek. So I really appreciate that part of it. Sadly, they didn't get to explore that in a series format until Picard, really, where you literally see all the characters going through 20 years with ups and downs and how they reconcile that to who they become. This is a major point of that for Picard. I find that so much more interesting when Star Trek allows itself to go deep into that and to have the human beings face that. I mean, the movies at least give you some of that. You get that in Star Trek 2 with Kirk. You have a lot of that. So that I really appreciate about the movies, and I think is where they're at their strongest. I think they get to push the limits more than the early episodic Star Trek did. And I think modern Star Trek has learned from that really, really wisely.
I would agree with that. I mean, it took us, First Contact kind of set things up for the modern Trek going forward. As it was already said, it was the template for DS9's color palette and tone going forward. And Voyager kind of took that over, and Enterprise kind of had the feel of First Contact and DS9 also. Like, having just rewatched the series Enterprise, it's very much like it's supposed to be pre-original series, but feels like, oh, we're in DS9. It's kind of like people in jumpsuits and working in tight chambers and stuff like that. So, and I think it's only until like recently with Strange New Worlds that we've kind of have a hybrid with the tone of the original series, but still the feeling of modern Trek.
Storytelling, yeah.
Everybody got afraid of primary colors sometime after 1994.
Yeah.
Through 2009.
But yeah, to kind of wrap up this podcast, which I'll just say, like, I really enjoy this movie. I think all the points are taken, especially the ones you brought up, Toby. Because I was thinking about some of those things, and like, who else was supposed to be in that cockpit with Zefram Cochrane other than Lily? Because there's 3 seats, and like, did Lily and Zefram Cochrane build that whole ship, just the 2 of them, or was that whole community they were in, like the people who helped Zefram Cochrane build that shit? Anyway, those are thoughts that are not explained.
I love that question.
And they're not.
What I know.
Yeah, I will say, right, I've only realized some of these things. Some of it I only realized last night, on watching it for the 25th time or whatever, right? So I've only noticed these things because I love this movie and have watched it literally dozens of times and have paid for it in 3 different formats, so they're hard-won criticisms.
Those ponderings I now have about the movie have only come up in my most recent viewing, because I you have the space, I guess, to like take in the movie in different levels, because you've already taken in it all at the, like, maybe not superficial levels, but the direct levels that it presents you with. But I love this movie. I consider it like my first Trek movie, because I know I saw Generations in the theater, but I kind of left that lackluster. Like, I got to see it with a group of you, so it was a fun time. And so it's always like my Trek movie, or the movie I got to see and experience Star Trek on the big screen fully. So I always take away that memories. But before I wrap up, are there any other like final thoughts, either about the movie or about what we've spoken about before we wrap up?
Question for our resident Star Trek expert, Josh or John, if you could answer this. So the Borg are susceptible to cold, right?
Generally, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
right.
And so that's why they like heat and humidity.
Nitrogen.
Okay, yeah. Because was that ever brought up in a previous episode about the heat and humidity, that the Borg cube was very hot?
They mentioned specifically the in Next Gen.
Okay.
They mentioned the that was an at least my memory is at least insofar as like an identifying marker, and I think it's a reference to cybernetic technology and the way that
Steve Austin couldn't stand the cold.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you for answering that question. Thank you. I knew you guys could answer it.
Yeah, that's interesting. The thing about the Borg Queen, I get that criticism. I think it was not a great development for the Borg or for Star Trek in general, but I think it was exactly right for this movie.
Yeah, I agree. I mean,
I
list the View videos I watched in preparation for this podcast. That's what everyone agreed. Like, she's not great for the Borg going forward, but she's great as a counterpart villain for Picard and Data to physically grasp with, instead of like
a corporeal villain in this film.
Yeah.
And it makes sense for the time that you spend with the idea, for the time that you have to get used to the idea in the movie. It's like, oh, okay, it's a collective. Okay, so it's like an ant colony, and they have a queen. Okay, it's insects. It makes sense. Beast. Like, so there's like just enough papering over of what you thought you knew about the Borg already to make it work. And I think, yeah, like you said, Joe, it's like a compelling personified villain.
Mm-hmm.
In the show, they were so terrifying because there was no one that you could deal with. They were more of a force of nature.
Mm.
And they
And
were
in
sort of dorky. Like they
right.
were just sort of slow when
But
they'd
that
fall
also
over and go blah, 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 blah.
yeah, but that also made them terrifying. It's like
Yeah, exactly. Like
why aren't they more into this, for lack of a better word? It's like they don't
Well,
care.
and
they
then
were
in First Contact they sneer. And I
Yeah.
was like, no, they don't sneer. They just send another one to kill you. There's no sneering. But then First Contact had to have the head turns and like my brain works so hard being like, well, it's an adaptation they're trying because that way they can scare some of the people. And so you have to not all adaptations work out. Some of them are evolutionary dead ends. That's okay.
I did have this thought while watching it, like last night or the last 2 nights when I watched it. I was like, is this just Aliens with Star Trek? Did they just like do the movie Aliens except they did it with Star Trek?
Yeah, but like if you're
disgusting scenes there.
but like if you're gonna rip off a movie, or if you're going like to take inspiration from a movie, I mean, you could do worse.
Oh no,
Aliens
Aliens
That's true. That's a good point. Yes.
Yeah, Aliens is a fantastic movie. I was just like saying, like, they got a queen. It's more action. There's more Borg that are swarming. I'm like, they kind of did it.
Originally, I thought they were like, and the series they were more like Frankenstein monsters. But I think Lily put it very well when she called them bionic zombies, and I kind of like that description of the Borg.
Sounds Swedish.
Sounds Swedish, yeah. I forgot the best line in the film.
Well, I think that's a good note to wrap up this conversation about First Contact. Since all our Star Trek conversations evolve into something, I'm sure this is not the last we have to say about First Contact.
Yeah.
Maybe in its own separate podcast, but not part of a future podcast. But of course, I could not have done this Star Trek podcast without the rest of the crew. So thank you very much, Joe.
Oh, you're welcome, James. It's always great to get together with the gang here, with the crew, and do this.
Thank you very much, John.
Oh, this is a lot of fun.
Thank you, Josh.
I broke my little ships.
And Toby, thank you for being on your first Star Trek episode.
I'm so happy to be here, and this is my first contact with Joe.
Oh.
Hope I didn't scare you.
Thank you for being on brand with that. That is a fantastic way to wrap up the episode. So thank you very much, audience, for taking the time to listen to this. If you've enjoyed First Contact or have thoughts about it, or maybe you're wondering where was Lily Sloan in the alternate timeline that we've created with First Contact, you can leave them in the comments section of how you're listening to this podcast. We thank you for listening, and we will talk to you on the next episode.